Welcome back to With the First Pick. I'm Ryan Wilson. That handsome devil is Mike Renner. And Mike, just so you know, a little thing we do here, 71 days until the actual draft. Keep the score at home. So we're getting there, brother. By the way, before we get going here and fire up this mock draft, I was actually curious because I'm in the nostalgia phase of the mock draft period. I wanted to look back and see when the actual first mock draft hit the internet. So I did a quick Google search. And I think 2000 was one of the sort of first times we saw mock drafts show up in the old Google search engine. And one of the funniest things is not that, because mock drafts are now, sort of how we make our living. But I found the OG, Mel Kiper's top 50 from back in 2000, which is great. And you got everything right, it feels like. But at the very bottom of that story, Mike, it says, for more information on Mel Kiper's draft publication, call this 1-800 number. So that's a different time we were living in here. So 1-800 with the first pick. We're going to start this mock draft right now. A little stroll down memory lane here. First up, Titans are number 1 overall on the draft board. They had a pretty terrible season, and they made some changes, of course. And one of those changes might be the quarterback position. But, Mike, we're mixing things up a little bit here. We've been doing the Titans taking the quarterback for since the end of the season. This time, the old New York Jets are trading up to number 1. And you're the general manager. What are you doing if you're the New York Jets trading up to number 1 and the Titans move down to number 7?
We're taking a big swing, right? If you're the New York Jets, I think obviously moving on from Aaron Rodgers, that's already been well publicized. But they are, compared to everyone else, they're at a bad spot to get a quarterback at number 7 if they don't make a big play. And they're also in a bad spot that they're a good roster. It takes a bad roster or bad management or something to bottom out to get you the number 1 overall pick. So they drafted too well, quite frankly, in the Joe Douglas era. Like, he had a cupboard that was pretty full, especially on the defensive side of the ball, that you're not going to draft number 1 overall, even if you start Tyrod Taylor at quarterback. So got to make the play. And I think this is the class to do it, where you'll have evals all over the map. And so if the Titans aren't in love, and if they're shopping that pick, I would be the first to call if I'm the New York Jets, because if Cam Ward hits, you are a championship caliber football team very, very quickly, in my opinion. And so that's where I'm going with the number 1 overall pick if I'm the New York Jets.
And it's tricky, right? Like, I understand why you do it. And, we just had the conversation about Jalen Hurts, who was the second round pick that no one was taking seriously in that draft class. And he just won a Super Bowl because in large part of what he was able to do over the course of the season and in that Super Bowl. But when you look back at the history of teams trading up, most recently the Carolina Panthers, and they go up the farm, it usually doesn't work out. Now, there are examples, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, but they didn't trade up number 1, the Chiefs and the Bills, to get those quarterbacks. So it's a dicey proposition. But if you love this guy and you don't think, or you think you're sort of one-ish player away and you can build around him, and you talk about the roster the Jets have, I get that. I'm going to give you a list of some potential trade-up teams as well. You tell me if you feel better or worse about perhaps some of these teams trading up instead of the Jets in terms of being closer to perhaps finding their way back to the playoffs. And number 2 are the Browns. The Giants pick a few spots later. Then you have the old Raiders there, and they've been historically looking for a quarterback for a couple of years now and just on the outside looking in. The Saints, we'll see where they are with the new coach in Kellen Moore. And I put the LOL Steelers on there because I'm a Steelers fan. Anything strike you as a potential landing spot for one of these quarterbacks that's a better situation in terms of the personnel, at least, than the Jets?
I think the teams that are the most interesting, I don't know if the personnel is actually better for any of those teams. Quite frankly, I don't think it's actually better for any of those teams. I think the Jets might give you the best personnel. But I think the most interesting is a 1-2 swap. If the Cleveland Browns, because it wouldn't cost the Browns a ton, and if you're the Tennessee Titans, you get some picks in return, but then you also don't pass on a guy like Abdul Carter, who would be obviously your top pass rusher overnight. So that's the one where, if I'm talking a most realistic trade of this bunch, like the Browns are the one where, beat everyone else to the punch and just get up to number 1 and get your guy.
Yeah, and I wonder if that would actually make Myles Garrett happier in the sense that he doesn't want to leave Cleveland, because I think the quarterback is one of the big missing pieces in Cleveland. That team isn't as bad as perhaps they played last year. They went to the playoffs a year ago, which is sort of hard to remember, but true story. And Kevin Stefanski's done a great job when he's been allowed to do a great job. All right, we'll have plenty of time to talk about what happens at number 1, but mixing up a little bit there, had the Jets moving up. Everyone in that organization, the front office and coaching staff is new. So I got some guy named Rick Spielman's there as well, and maybe they go get a quarterback. All right, number 2, Cleveland Browns. You mentioned him there, Mike. You're big on Abdul Carter. I like Abdul Carter a lot. I took Mason Graham just to mix things up here. And I'll just ask you this. Mason Graham's the interior defensive lineman out of Michigan, super twitchy. He's a problem. He's so disruptive in the middle of that defense. Who makes the most immediate impact, we'll say, on this Cleveland Browns team without a Myles Garrett? Would it be Mason Graham or would it be Abdul Carter?
I think Mason Graham's more NFL ready. I do think he's just, I mean, even in terms of like guys like Jalen Carter, Quinton Williams, who have hit the NFL in recent years with high level buzz, I think he is the most NFL ready of that bunch. Like that guy looks like a third year NFL tackle on tape at Michigan. It's just, he doesn't have the physical imposition that those two other guys did. Like he's not as quick as Quinton Williams, not as explosive, and not as like strong as Jalen Carter. So he's just a little behind them athletically. But that guy looks like he's been playing defensive tackle, his entire life. That guy, he's a very, very safe pick if you're the Cleveland Browns at number 2.
I think safest way to put it. He feels a lot like sort of the Aiden Hutchinson pick for the Detroit Lions a few years ago. That's a safe pick. Lay up, go to bed at night, feel good, come back Friday, and continue to crush the draft. All right, next up, New York Giants. And Mike, you're picking for the Giants. They need a quarterback. Checks notes here. What are you doing?
I'm going Travis Hunter here. They need more than just a quarterback. But I think with where they're at with Joe Shane, Brian Dable, the GM and head coach, they need to save their jobs. I don't think a rookie quarterback here at number 3, whether it's Shadeur Sanders, I'd be probably the only one you would consider here at 3, is going to save your job year one, unfortunately. So I think they're going to have to go explore other routes, whether that's Sam Darnold, whether that's Aaron Rodgers, who knows? But I think they need some guy to help them win right now. And Travis Hunter is the guy who's going to help you win right now. I mean, he is a stud. He is my cornerback 1. He's my wide receiver 1, whichever place you want to put him, or if you want to put him at both. I think he's going to make an immediate impact at either or both.
All right. I'll be John Mara, excuse me, the owner of the Giants, and you can be Joe Shane. All right, smart guy. Who's the quarterback then if we're taking Travis Hunter?
Yeah, that's where it gets tough, right? I don't love any of them. But, man, does Aaron want to stay in New York? Aaron Rodgers? You call him up, see if he wants to be a Giant? I don't know. Truthfully, that's unfortunately the world you have to live in. You can't just burn a top 3 pick, not burn, but like really play too far for the future because, it may not and ultimately be up to Shane. It may be John Mara saying, hey, we're going to do what's in the best long-term interest of our franchise. But that's just where I think they ultimately stand right now.
Yeah, and I get it. Travis Hunter is another layup pick. I mean, if he went first overall, all things else considered, I would 100% understand why the Titans or whomever decided to do that. Next up at number 4, the New England Patriots. And, maybe this ends up working out. They won those games down the stretch, knocked them out of the first overall pick. I think they're exactly where they need to be to get the player that they need, and that player is left tackle Will Campbell out of LSU. Abdul Carter still sitting there, and that would be a super enticing pick, especially for new head coach Mike Vrabel, who's obviously played at Ohio State on the defense, and in the league he was an edge rusher and sometimes tight end. But I think Will Campbell solves the biggest problem they've had for several years now. They got their quarterback. For some reason, the last few draft classes, they refused to draft a tackle, and they need help at other positions, wide receiver among them. But I think Will Campbell, and I think you and I agree on this. Kelvin Banks Jr. I like a little bit better. He's a little more athletic, the left tackle out of Texas. But much like Mason Graham conversation a moment ago, I think Will Campbell's ready to go now. Put him in there, and then worry about other stuff as you get through the draft process. And they have so much money in free agency. If they want to do a T. Higgins thing, they should do a T. Higgins thing. So the arrow is pointing up on the Patriots. So good place to start. At number 5, Jaguars, new head coach. They're still waiting on that general manager. This is a pick you don't need a general manager to make, it feels like, Mike.
Yeah, at this point, in my opinion, with the top 5 pick, and that's why I a little bit worry about the Patriots at number 4 going someone like Will Campbell, is you kind of throw need out the window, right? I would, at least, if I'm drafting the top 5, because if I'm drafting the top 5, I have a lot of needs. You don't just fall backwards into a top 5 pick with this loaded roster. So it's a top 5 pick. You go talent over everything. And to me, Abdul Carter is the best talent here. I know you have Trayvon Walker, who was the number 1 overall pick. I know you have Josh Hines-Allen, who was, I believe, a top 5 pick. Was he number 5 or number 6? Whatever. He was close to a top 5 pick. You have 2 edge rushers that are. But Walker could play a little on the interior. And having 3 edge rushers, as we've seen with the Philadelphia Eagles, is a nice problem to have. So I'm taking the best player here I'm eschewing positional need because of the Jaguars. Like, you'll find that elsewhere. Just get talent on this roster. It's been so long since they prioritized just talent at some point.
Yeah, extra 10 points for using the word eschew correctly. So I love that. Notre Dame education looking good there. But to your point, I think Jaguars fans don't have to squint and figure out who Abdul Carter is. Travon Walker was something they're like, okay, what are we doing? We just talked about Aiden Hutchinson going number 2 in that draft. And Travon's come on, and no doubt about it. But I think Aiden Hutchinson was the easy choice, and Abdul Carter feels like the easy choice, even though he's only played outside for 1 year. He looks like he's been there forever. All right, next up, the Raiders' dreams continue to come true. Tom Brady's there. They have Pete Carroll, who feels like the right energy they need in that building to turn things around. And the only thing left, they need a quarterback. So Shadeur Sanders here, you've had him going around this range in mock drafts. We'll see what happens in the actual draft, whether teams remain vigilant if their draft grades are such that Shadeur is outside of the top 5, or if there's a team that moves up to get him. But I'll ask you this, Mike, because I know you like Cam Ward a lot more than Shadeur. Can Shadeur have a chance to be successful in Las Vegas with the new regime?
I think so. I mean, Chip Kelly, anytime you pair him, pair a quarterback like Shadeur with a guy who's got a track record that he does, scheming up offense, a good thing. I think with the 2 tight ends they have there, that's going to play to his strengths, which is like the underneath intermediate passing game. He's not an electric deep passer. We've talked about his lack of high-end arm talent a good amount already so far this spring. But I think with that offensive line specifically, I think of the Raiders of late. You probably don't think of their offensive line, but this past year down the stretch, they were very good, and they're very young as well. So they have a lot of ascending players. Really, it's only that right tackle position where third rounder DJ Glaze was in there probably at the end of the year. TBD on how he develops into year 2, but your interior now on your left side all look pretty solid. So I think that's the biggest thing is with Shadeur, with his pocket presence, with his, sack avoidance issues, shall we say, on tape at Colorado. Some his fault, some not his fault, but you want to put him behind a good offensive line early. I'm fairly certain about that.
Yeah, and I think the same issues that plagued Shadeur, and we saw a little bit with Cam, are the ones that plagued Caleb last year, and those are things that aren't going to go away immediately, and it took Caleb what felt like 2 or 3 months to figure it out, and then once he started figuring it out, oh, there's the Caleb we saw at USC. I'm a little higher on Shadeur than you. I think he throws a pretty good deep ball, but, we got time to sort through that, and that's okay. If we all agreed on everything, we wouldn't be doing these shows anyway. All right, let's get to pick 7. The Titans have traded down from 1 to 7, and I know that fans clamor for draft compensation, and what I always say is whatever you want the compensation to be, if you want 12 first-round picks, let's give you 12 first-round picks if that makes you happy. The point of this conversation is to discuss what it might look like for the Titans should they trade down. And here are some recent trade down scenarios. The Panthers, of course, maybe this works out, but on paper it didn't work out initially for Bryce Young. The Jets and Sam Darnold initially did not work out. And I'm just being disrespectful by putting that Mr. Trubisky trade on here because Alvin Kamara and Fred Warner immediately negate that trade. But Mike, getting Tyrone McMillan, I'm spilling the beans here. That's who you have the Titans taking here. Plus, whatever you want to call this draft haul here. It feels like the Titans should be winners, correct?
I think so. I think it's going to basically replenish this team that, quite frankly, is just not drafted well enough. They just don't have a lot of young guys who are talented. They have some good vets on that team, but that's about it, unfortunately. And so pair him with Calvin Ridley, definitely more of the skill set I think Will Levis trends towards. It's not the most accurate, but he can go down the football field. And at this point, if you're trading back to number 7, you're riding with Will Levis. So I think that's where I'm looking at is wide receiver, maybe offensive line here. Obviously, you've gone offensive line the fast 2 first rounds, though, 3 straight first rounds. I'm not opposed, but I think it's time to start investing resources elsewhere. Wide receivers where I'm going.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I've had the same thoughts, like offensive line, just keep drafting those guys until you get it fixed. I guess the question now is, are we leaning into Will Levis? Because Brian Callahan showed some trepidation, shall we say, throughout the season, and frustration on top of that. And here's the question. Does Will Levis have the mental makeup to get over the hurdles of getting benched and sort of making the mistakes we saw him make the first 2 years?
I think he does. I don't think you're going to phase this guy. It's more just, I don't think he has the mental makeup from the pocket. I think he's got blind spots to his game that are just, he doesn't, when you talk about, we go back to like mid 2000s Madden when they had the vision cone, his vision cone just does not expand, unfortunately. He's got these just blinders on, and so he misses pressure too often. He misses defenders that are in throwing lanes too often. And I thought he took steps forward this past year in certain ways when you watched him from year 1 to year 2, which is encouraging. But that issue not only didn't go away, it just like it was the same guy we saw as last year at Kentucky, and that's worrisome to me.
Yeah, 100%. When Mason Rudolph is coming in for you, that's probably not a good feeling in the short term or the long term. So we'll see what happens here. Of course, the Titans could just pick a quarterback number 1. But for the sake of the conversation here, 71 days out, we had him trade down. All right, Mike, let's take a quick break. When we come back, the Panthers on the clock at pick 8. What are they going to do? We'll tell you right after this. Welcome back to With the First Pick. Ryan Wilson, Mike Renner, 71 days until the actual NFL draft on April 24th. In our mock draft here, Carolina Panthers are up, picking 8th overall. Things got better for Carolina down the stretch. I can say that and feel good about it, and Bryce Young should feel good about it too, because it looked like his season and perhaps his career in Carolina was over after two weeks, and then he bounced back. And now they're going to get a little help on the defensive side of the ball. I'm making this pick, and I'm sort of stealing it from Mike's mock draft that came out Monday on CBS Sports .com if you want to check that out. Georgia do everything defender Jalen Walker. And Mike, we've talked about this before, but his versatility and dynamism makes him pretty intriguing. And it feels like a guy that comes in and can do a couple things for you. And maybe in part fill the void left by Frankie Louvu, who is a hair on fire type player. But this guy's such a high-end athlete. He can do a couple other things as well.
Yeah, he's kind of what everyone's looking for in these blitzing, off-ball, maybe on-ball types. Andrew Van Ginkel, or a guy that just can wear a lot of different hats. And so when he's lined up, you basically don't know what defense they're going to be in, right? Like it really gives you some disguise because he's that versatile. And especially the Jiro Everos. Like he was trying to do that with Jadeveon Clowney. He's trying to drop him into coverage. And it's like, that ain't what Clowney can do, right? But Jalen Walker can. So I love this fit for the Panthers. This is the one where, like, if I were to fit one guy outside the top, 5 where they kind of write themselves, this one feels like one that's probably the most realistic going to happen on draft day.
Yeah, we talk about running backs having sort of a resurgence with Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan to a lesser extent. It feels like the off-ball linebacker who adds a little something to their tweener versatility games getting a little bit more love now too, because we, for the longest time, off-ball linebackers were late day 1, maybe day 2 guys, and then the athleticism and versatility these guys are playing with, you start talking about them a lot more. Maybe Micah Parsons paved the way for that, and understandably so. Next up, pick number 9. Wait a second. Wish I had a siren here, but there's another trade. 2 trades and 1 mock draft in the top 10. We got the Saints moving down and the 49ers moving up. And who are the 49ers taking at number 9, Mike?
Yeah, I think everyone's going to want to jump the Bears for an OT and for the 49ers, if you want one, right? Because I think we have Will Campbell coming off the board early in this one. I think Will Campbell, Kelvin Banks, and then a little bit of a tier. Depends on how you like Missouri's Armand Membu. I think he's more of a guard at the next level, truthfully. Now, some people like him at tackle still, but I think he's more of a guard and obviously played on the right side. But with the 49ers, Trent Williams is getting up there, man. I know he's ageless, but he's getting up there. They need any help they can get along their offensive line, even though they hit Dominic Puny. So I'm going to go Kelvin Banks Jr., your heir apparent to Trent Williams on the left side, and then also a guy who can maybe slot at left guard, right tackle, wherever you really need him this upcoming fall. I think he could play right away. He's a very athletic guy that fit right into that scheme.
Yeah, I love it. And, we love all these picks at this time of year. And I remember, again, as a Steelers fan 2 years ago when the Steelers leapfrogged the Jets to get Broderick Jones, I was incredibly happy. His career's been up and down. Position keeps changing, and not entirely his fault. And the Jets had to settle, quote unquote, for Will McDonald IV. He's been pretty good too. So these things typically work out, but I love this pick. And Kelvin Banks, as I mentioned before, is my favorite tackle in terms of the athleticism and upside, and 49ers need him. The Bears also need him at 10. And on some level, maybe Ryan Pace is pulling his hair out, or Ryan Poles, excuse me. But you sort of hinted at it earlier there. Armand Membu, right tackle out of Missouri. I'm taking him. And you mentioned maybe his future might be inside. He's under 6'4", which is a concern for your tackle. He has 34-inch arms, 81-inch wingspan. And if you don't know, those check the boxes for tackle. And you know this as well, Mike, because you've had him in mock drafts for a few weeks now. When you watch him play, there's not a lot to be worried about in terms of the way he carries himself. I'll ask you this. Is he better coming out this year than Darnell Wright, their first round pick 2 years ago at right tackle was?
That's tough. I think Wright was more advanced. 4 years versus 3 years, right? Armand Membu's coming out earlier. I think Membu's much more of a cleaner pass protector, but Darnell Wright, his last year at Tennessee was like different, and he was like a physically imposing dude. So probably similar ultimate grades I'd have on both of them coming out. Yeah.
Perfect. That makes me feel great that if I'm the Bears, because then you can pencil them in and figure it out for sure. Awesome. I love it. And I think it's good to have choices. And it's funny, for the longest time in the fall, there were only sort of two guys we were talking about tackle. And then as you start watching more guys and see guys start to turn the corner as the seasons progress and they get a little more experience, some more names popped up, and Membu has certainly been one of those guys. All right, the Saints trade down 2 spots. They got a new coaching staff in there. They have some things to sort out, maybe a wide receiver, maybe a quarterback. Defensive needs for sure. And what are you doing if you're Mickey Loomis for the Saints here at 11?
Well, I'd love to keep trading down if I'm the Saints. This is the draft to do it, in my opinion, especially after like the top 5. There's not a lot of difference between pick 8, pick 20, just in terms of the grades I'll have on these guys. And with the Saints, you just need so many more players, right? You need to backfill all this expensive talent that you have, all these weird cap hits that you have on the books, with just cheap guys. You need to reset this thing. So I'd love to keep trading back, but in this one, I have him going with Shamar Stewart, Texas A&M edge rusher, who's probably, of all the first-round draft picks, he has the biggest boom or bust potential. He is a true freak of nature. We'll see it at the combine with what he's going to run at 282 pounds. On tape, just special explosiveness. But on tape, he also had 1.5 sacks all last year. It's like, why is a guy who's 6'5", 282, might run the 4.4s at that size, why is he not producing on a collegiate football field? That's why it's like you have a chance at a home run, or a guy who's maybe, a limited defensive end for you at the next level. But for the Saints, you take the shot at the home run, right? This is the time to swing for the fences at high value positions to try to get some cornerstones that are at their best in year 3 or 4, right? You don't need them to be great for you right now, because you'll probably be drafting number 1, number 2, number 3 overall next year with where this roster is, but you need them to be good when your window opens back up in a few years.
Okay, so to recap, Mike has very little faith in the Saints next year, other than they might have a top 3 pick. Sweet mercy. All right, next up at 12, the Cowboys, and this feels like it's written in stone at this point. It could certainly change. The Cowboys have a ton of needs. Newish coach and Brian Schottenheimer, he got promoted, and Cowboys fans certainly weren't happy with Jerry about that, but that's nothing for us to concern ourselves with. I'm giving them Ashton Jeanty, the running back out of Boise State, who's a special talent. We've talked about him since the summer, and he was in the Heisman Trophy race, and he was, he got to go to New York as he well should have. It was well deserved. Anything else you would consider here? I mean, is there a player that you would feel better about contributing sooner than Ashton Jeanty on whatever side of the ball if you're the Cowboys here?
Yeah, I kind of like the thought of them going someone like a Emeka Egbuka or Luther Burden, even just another weapon across. But I like just weapons on offense. And if you're Jerry Jones, someone's going to sell jerseys, quite frankly. I mean, with all how weird their off seasons have been the past couple of years, and just kind of making a downgrade at head coach intentionally, seemingly just to save some cash. Maybe they're hurting. Maybe Jerry needs some jerseys to be moved. Ashton Jeanty, that cat will move some jerseys.
Can you imagine? All right, we got a few minutes left here, so I'm going to go through picks 13 through 16. The Dolphins, you had them taking Luther Burden. I get that. The Colts, I had them taking Tyler Warren, the tight end out of Penn State. Shout out to producer Stryker. At 15, the Falcons take Mike Breen out of Marshall. And at 16, the Cardinals take Walter Nolan, defensive tackle, at Ole Miss. So before we go to break here, Mike, tell the folks about Mike Green, who I spoke with at the Combine. Big season, went to the same high school in Lafayette High School, Williamsburg, Virginia, as some guy named Lawrence Taylor.
This is his first year as a starter. So he was a guy who was a backup. He started his career at Virginia as a linebacker, 215 pounds coming out of high school, transfers to Marshall, plays sparingly as a redshirt sophomore in 2023, but tape was great, but it was only apparently like 235 pounds, works his butt off this past offseason, gets up to 250 and has the most sacks in all the FBS. I love that he has just high-end body control. You see him being able to avoid hands consistently on tape. And then the guy plays with his hair on fire. That bull rush against Josh Connerly his ability to bend back on the edge that you saw consistently on tape and right there in those drills at the Senior Bowl. To me, a very safe pick. Now, is he a 3-down guy? On tape, he was at Marshall, but it's different doing that in the NFL when you have, shorter arms, smaller hands, all those things working against him. But I love his tape. I'm going to buy into it and buy into the sort of trajectory that this guy's on right now.
Yeah, and he's a great kid too, and that becomes important this time of year. Is that number one in the one-on-one reps at the Senior Bowl Hall of Fame? What happened to him and at the moment right tackle Josh Connolly out of Oregon?
Yeah, that was pretty spectacular. I can't think of too many better than that, truthfully, over the course of my decade of being at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, and look, man, I don't want to keep calling out Josh Connolly because he was just wrong place, wrong time. He's a really good football player. It feels sort of like I think it was Nicholas Petit-Frere against Aiden Hutchinson in that actual Michigan-Ohio State game where something similar happened.
Or he called him out. Yeah, he's like, come block me. Well, he threw up his arm and then just ran through him.
Yeah, don't do that. It just feels like one of those situations where just you got. And I think, as I said, Josh Connolly's a good player. But, man, Mike Green, as the old saying goes, made himself a ton of money on that one rep, it felt like. And I don't think he practiced the last day of the Senior Bowl, and I don't blame him. No reason to go out there and risk injury after 2 solid days of practice. A great season, as you talked about, and sort of coming from where he came from, UVA, 215 to 250, and he was a solid 251 when he weighed in Mobile. So shout out to Mike Green. It's going to be fun to watch him over these next 71 days and see where he goes. Probability he's a first-round pick, is it 100%, or are you not willing to go that high?
Gosh, you never say never. I've seen some crazy things happen on draft day. Lyle Collins, I would have said 100% right beforehand, but it's about as close to right now. If we were to have a draft, I'd say 100% if it was today. So, yeah.
It feels like it. Shout out to Randy Moss and Byron Leftwich, former Marshall players who went in the first round. All right, let's take a quick break here. Got pick 16 in the book, halfway there. When we come back, the old Cincinnati Bengals are on the clock. Who do they take? We'll talk about that right after this. Welcome back to With First Pick. Ryan Wilson, Mike Renner going through the old mock draft 2 weeks prior to the NFL Combine. 16 picks in the book. Next up, Cincinnati Bengals at 17 off what can kindly be described as a disappointing season, not because of the offense. And I'll rip through these picks, the next 5 picks, Mike, and then we'll pick some names to talk about as we go through these. So at 17, the Bengals take Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle out of Michigan. The Seahawks at 18 take Tyler Booker, the offensive lineman out of Alabama. At 19, the Bucks solidified the secondary with Malachi Starks, safety out of Georgia, could be gone long before this. At 20, the Broncos take tight end Colston Loveland. Get Bo Nix a little help. And at 21, the Steelers take who? Will Johnson, quarterback out of Michigan. What the what? But let's start with Colston Loveland at pick 20. We haven't talked a lot about him because the quarterback play was so up and down, mostly down during the season for Michigan. He was, I think, everyone's tight end 1 coming out of the summer, and then some guy named Tyler Warren did his thing for Penn State. What should folks know about Colston Loveland? Because I went back and looked at my notes. This dude is an incredible route runner, incredible athlete. He just didn't get a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Like, he's still, even with the opportunities, though, I think he had over a third of their passing yards this year. He still was like their number 1 target. They just couldn't pass. So his stats didn't look like Tyler Warren's because he didn't have the opportunity to be that. But this guy is much, much more of the athlete that usually gets coveted higher in the draft, right? When you talk about guys that actually can impact the vertical passing game at the tight end position, he is exceptional at running the seam. The guy can get past that linebacker, portion of the defense. He has great body control to stay clean. And then his burst to get onto those safeties quickly, run a corner, run a post, very effective at the vertical tree for a tight end. That's what usually goes in the first round, right? That's to have that is usually what you need to go top 20, unless you're just so good at all the other stuff the way Tyler Warren is. So different types of tight ends. And Loveland, to his credit, he's a lot younger. He's not even 21 years old yet. Won't be 21 for a while. So he's a guy that, is still ascending, and he did it early on in his career as a sophomore. He was their second leading wide receiver on that, or just receiver on that national title team. So a lot to like as a receiver, still a little bit on the skinnier side. But again, it's unique that a guy's coming out at only 20 years old. You almost never see that at the tight end position.
All right, I'm picking up what you're putting down, and I say that as someone looking at pick 17 if you're the Cincinnati Bengals who took a defensive lineman that they desperately need. But let's say T. Higgins leaves. Wow. Would you consider Colston Loveland there?
I would. I think that's probably moves the needle a little bit more than maybe wide receiver 3 in Emeka Egbuka in that, Joe Burrow has never had a guy with like pure rapport over the middle of the football field. It feels like he should have, right? It feels like he should have his own version of Travis Kelce or Rob Gronkowski or Jason Witten. It just feels like that's the kind of guy who would excel and pair really well with a tight end like that. He just never had it. So give him Colston Loveland, and I think that's a guy that for the next decade, they're going to be together.
It's funny, and tell me what you think. This draft feels different in that the top 40-ish picks haven't really moved around a lot. And sometimes you see mock drafts over the years that have a lot of variation, whether it's quarterbacks going higher or lower. But this feels like a group of 40 or so. I don't feel like there are any guys that are going to surprise us unless someone runs like a 4-1 or something at the combine. But does this feel like a pretty solid group of guys that the pool is going to be 40 or so guys that we're picking from by the time we get to April 24th?
I think so. I'd be very surprised to see like a real late riser. Now I've been wrong before, right? There's been Terrell Edmonds. Which one was the safety? Terrell Edmonds come out of nowhere, right? And be like, how did that guy end up the first round? So NFL teams always do it. But I do think I think we're just getting better at this, truthfully. I think the draft media can peg the NFL better nowadays than they ever have before. We're just learning more and know their tendencies now.
That's a great point. Thanks for the shout out to Terrell Edmonds. That's what I needed to get my day going as a Steelers fan. All right, speaking of which, let's get to the next 5 picks here. Right after the Steelers took Will Johnson, which would be an absolute grand slam opposite Joey Porter Jr. A man can dream. But at pick 22, the Chargers take Mykel Williams, edge rusher out of Georgia. 23, Mike's Packers take Derek Harmon, defensive tackle out of Oregon. 24, the Vikings take Jahdae Barron. I think he is with the first pick favorite of both me and Mike's. 25, the Texans take Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State, played tackle this season in college. He's played everywhere in college and played inside at the Senior Bowl, guard and center, and looked like he'd been doing it his entire life. And finally, 26, the Rams take left tackle out of Ohio State, Josh Simmons, whose season was ended early with a knee injury. Let's talk about Gray Zabel because he may be one of the few risers over the last month or so. He had a really good season. I was impressed with the way he played in that Week 1 game against Colorado. And this dude just went to the Senior Bowl and played guard and center like he was headed to the Pro Bowl for the next 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, if you're the Texans, you saw how bad your interior offensive line was. Obviously made a change at OC. You're hoping that those issues will get fixed somewhat schematically. We also need some talent there. And with Zabel specifically, with the injuries they had up front last year, you can play left guard. You can play center. You can play right guard. How do we know that? Because we saw it all at the Senior Bowl. I've never seen a guy look as natural at all 3 positions on the interior without having had played them the way Zabel did that week. So it just made you feel really comfortable. Now, is he like an elite all-world talent? Tyler Booker looks much more like a prototypical guard, right? I don't think he has the traits that typically go top 20 at the guard position, but the performance is there. So, and it's a position where at the end of the day, it is a how you play the game sort of position. It's a skilled position, even if it's not technical, it's a skill position. So I found the Texans. I need the help now. I need it on the interior. I'm drafting a guy like Gray Zabel.
Yeah, and a couple things from the Senior Bowl. Talking to some folks, they said he's going to be a team captain from day one. Incredibly important. And the other thing is, not to go back to Josh Connerly and the Mike Green one-on-one rep, but I was watching it after the fact, just sort of watching people's reactions, and sort of what I do. And Zabel turned around and went to help Josh Connerly up. That was his first move, and maybe it's nothing, but it's also a guy who's there for his teammates when the chips are down. And those are things you notice. Those are things teams notice, and just something to keep in mind. It helps to be a really good football player, and Gray Zabel is certainly that. I want to ask you a few picks earlier about your Green Bay Packers taking Derek Harmon, and I think you're higher on him than I am right now. I'm going to go back and watch some more on them, but tell me on Derek Harmon as an interior defensive lineman, because he is built like he was out of a lab to sort of do that job.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing you see right away is that he looks like he could play just like that perfect intermediate body type at like 6'4" with long arms and 315 pounds that looks like they could play nose tackle, looks like they could play 3 technique, looks like they could play a 3-4 defensive end. And for the Packers, that's like really important for them to have that kind of versatility. They obviously, they have big needs at corner. And I think in this draft, we had Will Johnson slip into 21. We have Jahdae Barron slip into 24. You look at draft boards and a lot of those guys are a lot higher. Why? Well, I think we saw it for the Eagles. Quinyon Mitchell slipped to 22 last year, and a lot of people were a lot higher on him. I think the NFL is going to covet the trenches this year after they saw what won in that Super Bowl. You're going to see a lot of O-line go earlier than expected. D-line, it's a great defensive line class. So those guys are going to go before these corners. And for the Packers specifically, they may not have technically a need at defensive tackle, but they got to beat the Eagles. You got to stop that team specifically. So to beat the Eagles, you need guys like Derek Harmon. You don't necessarily need guys like Jahdae Barron.
All right, I'm going to keep that in mind because one of the teams that did not beat the Eagles were the Chiefs. We're going to talk about them next and the next final 6 picks in this mock draft. What do the Chiefs do? What do the Eagles do? And next up on the clock at 27, the Ravens. What do the Baltimore Ravens do? We'll find out right after the break. Welcome back to With the First Pick. 6 picks to go on this mock draft, Mike. And we'll go through them one by one. We got a little time here. 27, the Ravens. You had him taking James Pierce. I think he unofficially is listed at about 245. I thought he played bigger than that, but he feels like the type of freakish athlete the Ravens targeted at the edge position at this point in the draft.
Yeah, the Ravens, they play the draft as well as anyone, right? They kind of like know where the wins are. And one of the wins that they've hit on numerous times is just drafting great athletes on the edge and just developing them, right? If you have a good enough defensive line coach to pair with a guy like James Pierce, you'll get a guy, I believe, like in about year 3. I don't think he's an immediate high-end guy, but you're patient enough with this kid, and he is going to be a high-end pass rusher. I mean, he may even go a lot higher than this, truthfully, because his combine should be something spectacular when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I loved his tape at Tennessee, and I think, and you can disagree if you want, but I think he's much further along than Odafe Oweh coming out of Penn State and David Ojabo coming out of Michigan, who were crazy athletic, but just hadn't played a lot of football.
100%. Yeah. I think it's not even close to maybe between him and Odafe. And like, look what they did with Odafe. He's an impact pass rusher now.
Yep. 100%. Next up, the Detroit Lions. I haven't taken Jack Sawyer at Ohio State, it just makes too much sense with the Chris Spielman Ohio State connection. And this feels like the sort of player they draft. But you and I were talking that maybe JT Tuimoloau ends up getting drafted higher, maybe ends up being a better player. It's so hard to tell. And look, I know we've talked about Jack Sawyer and not being the freakish athlete of an Abdul Carter or Miko Williams or whomever else is drafted above him. But I always tell myself the cautionary tale. TJ Watt went to the bottom of the first round because he was too stiff. And sometimes guys get better and they grow. It's just one of those things. We'll see. We'll see what happens with Jack Sawyer. I think he's a good player. We'll see how good he is. Next up, 29. Mike has the Commanders taking Josh Connerly Jr. Any concern at all about the Senior Bowl? Now, our buddy Rick Spielman said, look, he was playing right tackle for a lot of that. He's not a right tackle. They were trying him out there, so he was out of his element, so to speak. He played left tackle at Oregon. Incredibly athletic, but also incredibly raw.
Yeah, I mean, it's not worrisome because I didn't think he was going to do well in the first place. Like, his tape or like his polish is not why I'm going to bat for him. I'm going to bat for him. Guy is one of the best athletes in this draft class, at least the best like major prospect along the offensive line in this draft class. He can fly. He's got great feet, and it's just a matter of time if you get a guy with the right offensive line coach. And you get a guy like that with Jaden Daniels, I think is when I get really excited because he can pull out in space on those sort of QB keepers or things of that nature. And that's when you can spring those big plays.
Yeah, they had him line up at quarterback, I think on an extra point at Oregon last year. So Connerly is not short on athleticism. At pick 30, Buffalo Bills, and you've had this player going there, and I think I've had him going there previously as well. South Carolina safety, Nick Emmanwori. He's another freakish athlete. Looks like he was built in the lab. He has uncanny ball skills. He's always around the ball, and he seems to make good plays, and then he'll pop you coming downhill. But let's finish up with the Chiefs and the Eagles here. 31, The Chiefs, you have them taking Nick Scorton, the Purdue transfer, Texas A&M, this season as an edge rusher. He's 285 plus probably by the time it's all said and done. Would you consider trading up for an offensive tackle if you're the Chiefs?
Oh, man. I don't think so. Truthfully, just because I don't think there's a guy who's day one ready. It's just easier said than done along the offensive line, right? And this isn't the class to do it. Last year would have been the class to do it, right? Last year was the year where it's like, okay, there's so many. And you saw
9 guys
some of those
in the
guys.
first round.
Yeah. So last year would have been. This year, you'd have to go way up, in my opinion, all the way up to, I think the last one that came off the board that I think would be actually year one upgrade went off the board at 10. So you're going to have to go way up. So I just don't think it's feasible for the Kansas City Chiefs, unfortunately.
So Nick Scorton here, what does he add? Because they have George Karlaftis, they have Felix Anudike-Uzomah. What does Nick Scorton bring you when you add him to that room?
It's just, keeping up with the Joneses in the arms race that is getting after quarterbacks. You can't have too many. He's definitely their kind of edge, or Steve Spagnuolo kind of edge. He loves the jumbo guys, the bigger edge rushers, the guys that can maybe kick inside on third downs. That's Scorton. And with him, it almost feels like when they drafted Chris Jones, in that he's got effort concerns. He's got kind of weight concerns with what he put on tape this past fall. It wasn't as good as what he put on tape the year before that. And so if you can get that guy in a spot with a winning culture that's going to kind of hold him accountable, he'd go much higher than this, right? I think he's much more talented than pick 31, but he still could fall there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, pick 32. Philadelphia Eagles, Super Bowl champions. We'll see if Eagles fans are still happy when they hear the pick that I made for them, because as you noted, and every Eagles fan on planet Earth will let you know, they do not take linebackers in the first round. So naturally, I had them taking Jahad Campbell out of Alabama. I think you can line Jahad up all over the place. He's still 20 years old, I think, and he's going to get bigger, stronger, and faster, presumably. Would you be okay with this?
Gosh, it obviously depends on what they do with Zach Bond. I think if you have Zach Bond in the fold, even though Nakobe Dean may not be back next year, right? That was a pretty tough injury for him to have with the patellar tear. That's not like an easy one to come back from. But Campbell and Bond are like synonymous almost. They're like the same guy. So I'd be okay with it because he can rush the passer, right? The guy is a glorified edge with what he can do as a pass rusher. So from that perspective, you can almost like sell it as not an edge, but it just depends on if they have Bond or not.
Right. They have to sell it to the fan base that he's not actually an edge. They're losing Brandon Graham. They have some other guys up. Would you consider like a guard here with Mekhi Becton potentially being up?
Probably not. At this point, we were actually looking, and I was like, man, the board's kind of barren for the Eagles. I think this is like one of the worst case scenarios for them if it goes this way. So, Donovan Jackson maybe is your best bet at this point, but in terms of like offensive line talent, but I don't even know them. Yeah,
and as our buddy producer Debo told us, Tyler Steen is also there. All right, Mike, that's it. 32 picks in the books. Pre-combine mock draft. Remember, get worth the first pick wherever you get your podcast, and we will see you guys later.